Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Dr. Daniel Kelly. I'm the Academic Director for Graduate Programs for the Preston Robert Tisch Institute for Global Sport. This is our next installment of the Insider Series for the industry. And today's topic is on athletic directors. And this is part one of our college administrators series. And so we're pretty excited for today's event. And my co-host, Shay Decker Jacoby, will be the moderator for this session, and I will serve as one of the attendees and panelists. Shay, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kelly. And thank you all for joining us today. We are here with three very distinguished athletic directors to discuss their career path, their role in the student athlete experience, and some of the struggles that they've faced over the past year. I'm only going to give a brief background of the three panelists, but we've put their bios in the chat for your reference. So first, Dr. Nikki Moore began her role as Colgate University's Vice President and Director of Athletics in June of 2018. In this role, she leads the university's 25 NCAA Division I athletic programs, as well as the club sports, intramural programs, and the physical education program. She is one of the very few female Division I athletic directors in the country. Before Colgate, Dr. Moore served as the Senior Associate Athletic Director and Senior Woman Administrator at the University of North Carolina, and was the Senior Associate Athletic Director for Strategic Planning and Student Life at the University of Oklahoma. She's a member of the NCAA Strategic Visioning and Planning Committee, a member of the NCAA Mental Health Task Force, and is a fellow for the Collegiate Clinical Counseling Sports Psychology Association. I'm also thrilled to have here today Lauren Haney from my alma mater, Brandeis University. She became the athletic director in 2019 and oversees the university's entire athletic program, which includes 19 Division III varsity teams, as well as club sports, intramural programs, and the physical education program. Haney came to Brandeis with nearly 2 decades of experience in college athletics. Before Brandeis, she served as the Senior Associate Director of Athletics at Wellesley College and at MIT as the Special Assistant to the Athletic Director. Haney is a member of the Women Leaders in College Sports, the Minority Opportunities Athletic Association, and the National Association of Collegiate Directors of Athletics. And finally, our very own athletic director at NYU, Stuart Robertson. He oversees the 23 Division III varsity programs, as well as the intercollegiate club teams, a recreation program, and an intramural sports program. He leads a staff of over 600 professional and student employees as the department manages and operates the Palladium, Brooklyn, and 404 Lafayette athletic facilities. Robinson joined NYU in August of 2020 after serving as the Director of Athletics, Wellness, and Recreation at State University of New York at the New Paltz for 19 years. Prior to his arrival, he worked at Vassar College for 7 years and served as the Vassar head men's soccer coach from 1986 to 1990. In September 2020, he began serving on the NCAA Minority Opportunity Interest Committee. So thank you to all three of you for joining us today. So I'd like to start off by discussing what inspired and led you to a career in college athletics. Nikki, why don't you start?
I'm happy to. Thanks so much, Shay. It's really nice to be with you all. And, you know, I would, for me, this was not necessarily an intentional path that I set out on at the beginning. And I think it's not probably uncommon when you might hear that, but I started out as a student athlete at the University of Missouri and got really involved there. We didn't have a track, so I got involved, petitioning our state legislators and board of curators and that sort of thing, and was kind of, as a student athlete, got my first taste of what it kind of took to advocate for something to improve a sport. But it didn't even occur to me that this was even a thing. And so became a psychologist, ended up being hired at the University of Oklahoma back in 2004 as a full-time psychologist in the athletics department, and sort of just kept saying yes to things and taking on new responsibilities. And as I did that, I think I started to be able to see more, and like and understand the impact of leaders, in the space that I was in and in other spaces. And so ultimately, I got to the point, I don't remember, maybe started at OU and continued at North Carolina, where I was like, I can do this maybe even better than some of these guys, And so I think at some point, what inspired me was to expand the opportunity that I had to influence the development of the student athlete experience, the development execution of the student athlete experience. And anyway, so here I am and getting to do it. And it's way more, well, before COVID, it was really fun. COVID is less fun, but it is still fun. I'm still glad I'm getting to do it.
Thank you so much. Stuart, why don't you tell us a little bit about how you got started and what inspired you to pursue a career in college athletics?
I think similar to Nikki, it wasn't something that I was looking at. I think when I graduated from college, quite honestly, the first job was I was teaching English, and I really thought that I had a job at a prep school, and I really thought that I was going to be some version of the 40-year lifespan teacher, teaching English, coaching, and living the prep school life. And then I suddenly discovered that it was really isolating to be in these small towns and communities, and quite honest, with a lot of people that didn't look like me. And so after 2 years, I left, and I had an experience in going to Vassar where I worked in admissions and I got to do different things, but I had a great boss who allowed us to kind of follow still our passions. I love teaching, and I found that being a coach was another form of teaching. So I love the idea of being around the students and watching and helping them to grow. And the more I did it, the more I fell in love with it. The more I was engaged with it, I couldn't imagine doing anything else, because I think for me, it was really watching the development of students and learning, watching them kind of have their aha moments in terms of what they want to do. And then it being paid back, if you will, by them staying in touch or talking about how meaningful that experience was. And so even though I would go on and teach at a community college, and then eventually when I got to New Paltz, I also taught as an adjunct, I still love the teaching, but I love the potential impact on the students. And then at New Paltz, I had an opportunity to work as a special assistant to the president of the college. And I think that was really the transformational moment for me, because I felt like I helped to validate the role of athletics at a college. And that really was it was the best of all worlds. And I guess you could say I really enjoyed it enough. I stayed there for 28 years overall, but 19 as the athletic director, until somebody gave me such a great offer I couldn't refuse to move back to New York City.
Amazing. And Lauren, how about yourself?
Yeah, I think I'll echo a couple of the comments made by my fellow panelists. I definitely did not intend at the beginning to end up here. I, was a kid in high school who learned really, really quickly that my best position in softball was to be on the bench and to be on the sideline. But I had a really transformative experience and got an opportunity to meet an athletic trainer at that time. And I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do going into college, but I was intrigued by the work of the athletic training staff. So when I found myself at Penn State, starting off as a math major, quickly determining I did not want to continue to be a math major. I had an opportunity to see a little bit more up close what it meant to be a college athletic trainer. And that really was my area of passion. I would definitely tell you that's where I thought I'd always be in terms of my career. So finished up at Penn State, went on to grad school, had several positions in athletic training. And I reached a point where I thought, as impactful as the relationships I am making with these student athletes are, they spend a lot of time kind of outside of this athletic training room. And there's a lot more about their health and wellness and development that I'd really like to influence. So I had an opportunity, you know, I met the director of athletics at MIT, and I was so impressed with her and thought, if I ever have a chance to work there, I'm really going to go for it. And I remember applying for the job as the special assistant, and she reached out to me and said, why do you want to do this? And I said, I'm not quite sure, but I think this is the right path for me. And I'm sure we'll talk about later what an athletic director does all day, but it really actually showed me what the work is all day. And I definitely fell in love with it there. So, you know, I think being exposed to folks who really could show the impact that athletic administrators, particularly the athletic director, can have on students, it really appealed to me. And I certainly miss the days of spending time in the athletic training room. But I think the known impact that you can make in this role is so much different and so much grander.
Well, that's a great segue into our next question of what does an athletic director really do? And maybe speak to the Division III level. What are you doing on a day-to-day? What is your main role and duties to help support these athletes do what they do on the field?
Yeah, I think right now it feels like we're all junior epidemiologists as part of our role. That's a really important part of what we spend our time doing. I think in more normal times and still obviously today, for me, one of the most important things that we do is manage and really assist and help with student athlete and coach concerns, good times, bad times. That's what we spend a lot of our time doing. That is sometimes fun, sometimes challenging, but a really important part of the role. I think financial management, that's probably something that a lot of people don't really think about. But you know, at every level, it's managing your finances, trying to maintain people within their budgets, thinking about the operating expenses, but also what is possible on the revenue generation side, what's possible on the fundraising side. So I think that's another really important part of the role. Mm-hmm. I think it's really being an advocate. It's being an advocate, not just, you know, it sounds like for all of us, not just for varsity athletics, but the important role of club sports and murals and fitness and wellness on your campus, and being able to kind of sell that message to your faculty, to various departments on your campus is really important. You know, being a part of a bigger division, we report through the student affairs division, so it's also, you know, working with housing, working with dining. It's really working with your colleagues to support your student athletes. And last but not least is opportunities like this, making sure that you're giving back to a profession that has given so much to us. And so I'm almost always certain to say yes, because I think it's important for folks to hear a little bit more about the work, but also for us to be giving back.
Absolutely. Now, Nikki, can you kind of do a little compare and contrast on what the differences and similarities might be for a Division I athletic director?
There are way more similarities, I think, than differences, and especially at a school like Colgate, where I am over the entire division of physical education, recreation, and athletics, and we have outdoor education as well. That's within that. You know, that is a part of my experience here. Whereas, you know, both at North Carolina and in Oklahoma, or North Carolina, Oklahoma, Missouri, that wasn't kind of wrapped up in that. You know, I think the another big part of Division I is fundraising. It's facilities development. It's you know, really sort of engaging in that alumni relations area. There's also I don't know if it's I've not been a Division III athletics director, so I suspect if Lauren continued on just to explain the other things that she does, we probably would have, again, way more overlap. But you know, as I think about some of the how to kind of encapsulate it, I'm reminded of back when I was at Oklahoma and I first became a sport administrator. And I started asking people, okay, so what does one do as a sport administrator? I didn't have any sports management education at that point. I was, coming up from being a psychologist, whatever. And they're like, you figure it out. You're kind of a middleman between your coach and your AD. And I'm like, well, that will not do. And it took a while for me to figure it out. And so once I did, we actually wrote a manual, a sport administration handbook, and organized it around ABCs. And in a lot of ways, I think athletics directors do these things just at maybe a slightly higher level. And Lauren mentioned the first one is advance, or advocate, and sort of your role as an AD is to establish a vision, bring people around it, hold people accountable, inspire them, and have accountability for the outcomes that you're pursuing. The second thing is belay. So if you've ever gone rock climbing, you know that there's somebody up on hopefully if you're doing it safely, there's somebody up, that's attached to a rope. You're the belayer, the person that's belaying is on the ground, sort of keeping the slack and protecting them. And in some ways, as a sport administrator, I tell our sport administrators, you have a role to protect the coach, to protect the student athlete, to protect me as the athletics director, and to protect the university. So it's like you've got to kind of, you're in this oversight role where you're really keeping an eye on all these things and making sure things are staying in balance. And then the third one is connect. So advance, belay, connect. There are so many, it's so relational. I think, where it's your role as an athletics director is to have those relationships with alumni and that sort of thing. But you got to have a relationship with your coaches. You've got to have a relationship with your staff. You've got to have a relationship, frankly, with the, all the way, to the academic advisor or the strength and conditioning coach, and certainly with your colleagues across campus. Another sort of thing that maybe doesn't fit quite as nicely in there that I think about, that I spend a lot of time doing, is alignment, is making sure that our department, our goals, our activities are aligned with my university. Some of the things that I do and don't do at Colgate are very different than things that I would do or not do at UNC. And so, it just has to be kind of like, we have to stay in step. And the closer you stay in step, the faster you can get things done. So anyway, those are a few things I think that come to mind for me about that question.
Oh, it's amazing. Thank you. I love the ABCs. It's a nice, easy way to remember. Stuart, I'm curious to know, at NYU, what do you think the biggest challenges and maybe the greatest opportunities are within your athletic department? Even in a COVID-19 world, where do you see the biggest growth for your student athletes are, and how, as an athletic director, are you able to support them with that?
I think that in terms of a challenge, I mean, it's funny, when I came to NYU, and it was at the same time that Disney Plus kind of premiered Hamilton. And there's this line that in it where they keep saying the greatest city in the world. And that's, in a lot of ways, that's a great and a tremendous opportunity. At the same time, it is probably the biggest challenge that we have, because we are so landlocked. And unlike a lot of schools, we can't go outside the back of a building and then walk a short walk to a field. For us, it's getting on a bus, it's getting on the subway, it's getting in an Uber, it's doing that type of thing. And we rely on a lot of different neighbors and partnerships to try to create that space. And so, we have this saying that says at NYU, it's not for the faint of heart, because it really takes a real commitment and a dedication to be in a position to call yourself an athlete. In terms of what I saw and what attracted me, incredible opportunities, is that we cannot think of ourselves in the traditional sense of college athletics. We have to be creative, we have to be innovative, because when you work in New York City and you work, and you have buildings that are spread all over Lower Manhattan, it doesn't give you that same community sense. And as a result, people don't know that you exist. And I think that the opportunity for us is to fight for that credibility by engaging in partnerships across and throughout the campus, but at the same time, we have to find a new way of communicating and interacting and interfacing with today's students. Because, you know, our students are driven. They're thinking about their internships. They're thinking about those opportunities on top of, you know, because it's an investment. It's education is an investment, and they're looking at that, and we have to create those opportunities to connect. And I think that's where thinking beyond just the intercollegiate athletic side for us is critical. We have to think about the club sport athlete, the intramural athletes, and so forth, because that's the way that we can build a sense of community. And so for us, we've been talking about creating a sport network, not focused just on the varsity athletics, but trying to reach out and find those different pockets. You know, I've met some tremendous faculty members who have been willing partners to want to help with that in terms of that. NYU has resources, you know, with so many schools and so many programs. It's important for us not to be in a silo and to withdraw, but instead to kind of seek out those opportunities to partner. And we've been able to start to do that, but that's definitely a way that we're going to have to combat that, the biggest challenge for us.
Absolutely. It sounds like one of the biggest challenges over the past year is obviously COVID-19 and getting players back on the field. So what I'm interested to know how your role as an AD has kind of shifted, how you've had to be creative, what the main focuses have been for you over the past year as we had just hit our 1 year mark. Lauren, do you want to go first?
Sure. I think the role of an athletic director, even before COVID, can feel all-consuming. But I think probably all of us would agree that all-consuming means something very different now. And so I think it's really personally and also as a model, trying to encourage people, and for me to remember myself to take some breaks and really try to achieve some balance with work and kind of time off from work. I think for me, it's also been about remembering that the stakes feel incredibly high for our coaches and our student athletes, but also to keep that in perspective, right? Like there are very real, much higher stakes that the world has been experiencing. So constantly reminding people to really keep their perspective and to think and to be really thoughtful about some of the words we use and the challenges we have. They pale in comparison to some of the other challenges that people have. I think flexibility, obviously. What was a great plan last week is a terrible plan this week. So I think it's really trying to remember that and encourage people. I know we spent a lot of time on this, but now we have to shift and do something different and respond to the conditions that we find on the ground. And I think resilience, you know, I think there have been a lot of no's in order to get to yeses, and trying to help your staff, your student athletes kind of manage their anxiety about uncertainty, but also demonstrate resilience. I mean, I think that's one of the values that we believe that sports teaches people is resilience. And I think we've really, and I've personally had to really draw on that. There have been some challenging days, but that has made some of the really exciting days sweeter for us.
Absolutely. And then Nikki, Colgate just earned its second year in a row spot in March Madness. And this year they were actually able to compete. What went into kind of preparing your basketball program into entering a bubble, and what was maybe the shift and what actually goes into preparing a team for March Madness? And in COVID-19, how might it have been different this year?
So I didn't get it. I didn't quite get ahead of how different it would be. And so I really, and it was a huge mess for me in terms of helping and it's interesting because I actually read all the materials and I watched the video and I'm like, okay, I'm ready. We got it, you know, and in some ways, so many of the precautions and protocols that were associated with the NCAA tournament felt very familiar on paper, right? And because, okay, we've been masking, we've been distancing, we've been doing all of these things. And so it sounded like it was going to be normal. It was not. And here's how it wasn't. Okay, so we inform, we let the student athletes know and everything ahead of time what how it was going to go, that literally they're going to, if we won, they were going to get on the plane, like get on the bus. So we played at noon, that the bus was leaving at 3 to go to the airport to get on the charter to go to Indy. Well, of course, our coach didn't want to have them pack before we played because that would definitely make us lose. And so they had to run home, get packed, whatever. So get on the bus. So these guys have just won. So actually, the way it went, we won in 2019, we lost in 2020. BU won, but they didn't get to go. Then we won in 21. So they just won championship. Had only lost one game. One of the hardest years of their lives, for many of them. They'd moved 3 times up until that point, that semester, because of how we were managing our campus and in wanting to keep them quarantined and campus quarantine and whatever. And so they get on the bus and they didn't have time to eat. So they're on the bus and they have to take their masks off to eat, right? And they're celebrating. And it didn't even occur to me, that like, this is a problem. According, for NCAA protocol, you gotta have your mask on immediately, and keep it on the whole time. And we just put these guys on a bus anyway. Well, the whole point of it is, everybody with the bubble was very attentive to everything that was going on, and it wasn't just on us to enforce it. And so anyway, that ended up being something that we learned pretty quickly. But we got there. I actually ended up getting kept out of the bubble because our women's ice hockey team was playing in the championship in Erie. And when we thought we had gotten permission actually for me to merge under the bubble, can't merge onto the bubble. So anyway, so all of those things were quite different. And it was so closely orchestrated in the bubble. Like, you can only use the elevator at certain times and all of that sort of thing. So I wish I would have been able to foresee how different it would be, just because I think we could have helped our guys be in a little bit better headspace. And I hate that I think they did great, but sometimes you miss. I missed.
It's okay. Learning experiences. Sometimes the job is just throws you curveballs. So Stuart, I wanted to ask you, from the perspective of a former student athlete, one of the biggest roles of the AD is interacting with their students and supporting their athletes. And you mentioned trying to stay connected in a big city where you don't really have that campus. And it's more like pockets. How have you been able to stay connected with your student athletes with limited interactions and maintaining safety protocols?
Okay, I could say that even about my staff. Keep in mind, I went through this whole process virtually. Mm-hmm. And so for as large a staff as I have, here it is, some 8 months, almost 9 months into it, and I have met probably just over 60% of my staff at least once face to face. So, wow. It is this is a Zoom world. A year ago, I didn't know what Zoom really was. I knew WebEx and I knew a lot of buffering. I didn't have a real understanding of Zoom. But now I feel like an old pro. I can maneuver things on the bottom of this to say, oh, that's how you do this.
Hey, Stuart. Your staff have legs, just so you know, just letting you know. Sorry.
But, it's been interesting because I think you have to, in the age of COVID, you have to be intentional. It's really easy to kind of stay bunkered. And I think you have to find those times to really seek out and engage. And, you know, and part of it for me coming in, a lot of it is really, you know, not being halted by the idea that there was a pandemic, not doing something unsafe, but certainly encouraging people, hey, whether it's student athletes, whether it's been staff, let's get together on a Zoom. I want to hear from you. I want to talk to you. And then sometimes those conversations were, you know, there is no agenda. There is no, we have an hour, so let's attack these points, as much as it's, hey, how are you? What's going on? How can I help? And I think for our students, that has been the biggest transformation, was the notion that, you know, all of a sudden I'm seeing a lot of students who are still in California, or they're still in Texas, or they're somewhere else, but it's still sent to them. It was a sense of, hey, we still know you, we still care about you, and let's have a conversation. So I think that was really the biggest thing, is that, you know, you just have to make yourself available. And I think that's the biggest challenge, because a lot of times, and it's amazing, because when I talk to students or even some staff, oh, I know you're really, really busy. And I think that that's just a defense mechanism or a buffer to say, oh, you're so busy, as if you're unapproachable. No, you understand, my motivation right now comes from being available to you and hearing from you. Because all of this is in our heads, thinking we think we're doing the right thing, but we need that reinforcement to hear it from you, that we are still trying to have an impact on you and for you.
Amazing. I actually want to pose a question to all three of you, and whoever wants to jump in, please do so. COVID-19 really highlighted how athletic departments kind of rely on certain revenue strategies. Do you think COVID-19 will permanently alter or shift the way athletic departments are structured, even at the Division III level, where sports aren't really generating revenue?
I don't know. I mean, I think it almost feels like a perfect storm that COVID-19 is a part of, that is going to shift, that has a very strong likelihood of shifting the model of intercollegiate athletics, because, you know, it's paired with name, image, and likeness, you know, and it's paired with equity concerns, renewed in the last week, you know, very public equity concerns. You know, I feel like I'm missing like 3 other forces that are all feeding this storm. But so I do think it's part of it. And I think it depends so much too on what kind of campus it is, and, you know, what the stressors are, and what the economic model was beforehand. To be honest, I remember early in COVID, I was like, you know, stinks to be all Power 5 people right now, because we kind of know who we are, and we've got an economic model that's pretty stable, even in this kind of a situation. But, you know, we weren't trying to figure out how to make up $14 million of lost revenue, and trying to pay multi-million-dollar coaching contracts, you know, in a year when nobody else is getting raises and things like that. So, but I do think that the intercollegiate model is ripe for some change, and so it'll be interesting to see how it does.
For Lauren and Stuart, both of your institutions, I think, are going to see a lot of 5th years, a lot of graduate students participating in collegiate athletics. How do you think, what are the pros and cons do you see for that extra year, and maybe some students even receiving 2 years of extra eligibility within their sports?
Oh, I think that's a great question. We certainly have been thinking about that, and having conversations with our coaching staffs about our recruiting, and what impact that's going to have. You know, I think it's a big unknown. I think there are lots of students who, you know, are sophomores who intend to take that time, but I think things change pretty rapidly, and I think we're trying to plan for that as best we can. We're fortunate, you know, to have some good graduate programs, and, you know, the advice that I typically give to student athletes is, don't just make this about your sport, make it about your life. and make sure that if you were injured, the same message that we talk about in the recruitment process, make sure that if you were injured, that Brandeis is the place that you would want to be as a student. I think for them, making the decision to go to graduate school here, it's the same message. Make sure financially it makes sense as well, because obviously the financial aid picture looks very different from the graduate school side. And in Division III, you need to consider that as well. But I think it's actually just giving both our coaches and our student athletes space and time to kind of have those discussions. Do we have some flexibility in terms of our budget and making it work? Of course. I think we always want to see the best and the most we can for our student athletes. And, particularly because it feels like so much was kind of taken from them, we will figure out the finances. But it has to be the right situation for them. And that's really the message that our staff has really been gravitating toward. But I'll be honest, I've talked to lots of families about that choice. I think it's just really challenging because everyone's just trying to do the best thing in a situation where we've never really faced this question.
I would echo everything. Well, I don't know that I would have echoed it as well, but I agree with what you just said. The only other angle I'd add is the angle on sort of the first and the juniors, seniors, and upcoming first years who have not had the same recruitment experience as those who are already here. I think it will be very interesting to see if there is a shift in fit, and if it will, if you'll see an increase in transfers, or who knows. I mean, the transfer for portal. There you go. There's another one of those storm components. Yeah, I think that's going to be maybe something that because there's a backup, a little bit of a backlog in student athlete or prospective student athletes who want to play. But and in schools like ours at Colgate, we have one master's program that's really not designed for most undergraduates to just keep going. So the opportunities are a little bit limited.
Okay, great. I have kind of a follow-up question for each of you, but I'll start with Nikki first. You mentioned about the forces that the student athletes are dealing with right now. Would you expect that mental health or dealing with DEI issues on campus and inclusivity, LGBTQ, and those kind of change forces that they're dealing with while in a campus bubble, how are your student athletes able to manage all of those different forces?
It's a lot, as you might expect, and I do think that we're starting to see the mental health of students across the country suffer, and I don't think student athletes are all that much different. I do think that I feel very fortunate to have been at Colgate, where we brought everyone back to campus. We didn't go with single rooms. Like, I imagine, like, if you've got a bunch of people in a room by themselves, quarantine, like there's nobody, they're not talking to people. That's not good. And then you add, the stress that is absolutely a part of the social justice movement that is afoot. And that stress for our student athletes of color is great. I think that not everybody's gotten the memo that they don't have to be the expert in their classrooms or on their teams. They shouldn't have to be. And I think even for white students who are starting to perhaps wake up to some of the, how just an awareness of white supremacy and perhaps their complicity in it, like that's a source of stress. So I'm not sure that anyone is absolved, from these extra layers of stress. And I will say that, our student athletes at least have had, as long as they've been able to practice and compete, they've had a release, and they've actively talked about how in the fall in particular, when they finally started to get back together to practice, like how much better they started doing. But they've also been pretty vocal about how hard it is to live in a campus environment where not only are you subject to the normal behavioral expectations, but there's a whole nother layer of commitment to community health. And, you gotta have your mask on, and you can't gather, and you can't, so and there's a sense of loss too. I think we don't think about not only do you have grief and normal anxiety, but now you also have, you have grief. I'm sorry, not only have normal anxiety and stress, but then you also have grief, a grief of having lost a senior year, maybe last year, or a grief of losing that first year experience. So there's a lot there. And I do think it's important for us to all be proactive about addressing and trying to provide additional resources.
Absolutely. I'd love to follow that up with asking about how are those conversations, how have you been able as an athletic director to support those conversations of inclusivity, diversity? I know for NYU and Brandeis, the UAA has been highlighting athletes of color, minority athletes, and highlighting their stories. How have you, at your own departments at your own universities, been able to cultivate that conversation, create awareness, and support your athletes in the way that you can?
Well, I think the first thing is that I would say over the last few years, it has become apparent that when we talk about athletics in general, that one, if you don't create time and space to talk about the social issues and help to educate the staff and the administration and the students on how to have conversations, you're never going to be as successful on the field as you want to be. Because I don't think any human could see and watch all of the things that are happening and not have some opinion or some thought or just want to have a conversation. I think the hardest part about COVID is the fact that we don't get that human interaction, and that discourse is something that gets lost because there's a protected shield. It's interesting that over this past year, the more that Zoom goes on, it's much more comfortable to turn your camera off. It's much more comfortable to mute. And so part of that means that you don't have that interaction that you would have if you were in that room. And you don't get to fully appreciate the body language. And I was talking to someone, another group that I'm on this week about diversity and inclusion issues. And I said, part of this is it has exacerbated fears. For students, it has exacerbated the fear of meeting the demands of faculty and am I going to graduate? Am I doing this? I have a new learning style. I have a new learning approach. I got to play a sport, or can I play a sport? Will I get sick? Will I infect somebody? It's like a myriad of questions. And I think that has probably been the thing of, how do we do that? How do we stay in touch and how do we have those conversations? But I think it's also important to have those conversations. But the key to me is not having conversations that are strictly based off of one-off programming. It can't be a one-off lecture, hit, boom, I have a feel-good moment, and then in 3 days, it's like I can barely remember what that was about. There's got to be more of an intentionality behind it. And I think for us as athletic leaders, the thing that we learned last year is that watching professional sports is that athletics can have a huge platform. And for us, I think it's trying to figure out how on our respective campuses, regardless of division level, how do we use that? How do we in some ways exploit the opportunity and the privilege that we have to make those statements? And I think the thing I think has been absolutely wonderful and fascinating on our campus is listening to some of the student athletes starting to find their voice and wanting to express themselves or take the lead. And I think the bigger learning is for our coaches and staff, how to keep up. Because there is just such a familiarity and there's just such more confidence that I think that for some coaches and staff, they're afraid that they're going to say something wrong. Our students are kind of making it okay. We just want to talk. And I think that's the big thing that I have really come to appreciate over the last year.
Yeah, I think I'll just hop in just a couple things. I mean, I think obviously Nikki and Stuart have said so much, and I would just echo a lot of what they said. But I think for us, we've been really fortunate that, you know, our coaching staff, particularly in May, really committed to doing the work, and not just talking about doing the work. And that has meant, you know, we've had less practice time because we've committed to kind of having those ongoing conversations that Stuart spoke about. We also did kind of a really impactful five session series with our staff, where they were learning exactly what the student athletes were learning. And I think for me, it's also trying to understand and support what is most important for our students, and really kind of giving that voice. So, you know, a member of our women's basketball team was really enthusiastic about getting people registered to vote. And it's kind of cutting away some of that red tape and connecting her to the right people, and then kind of uplifting that message and putting it on social media and really giving students the platform they deserve to be doing the work that they want to do. And then, you know, we weren't competing in the fall, but turning it into a competition, and really competing about, you know, which teams could get everyone registered and then actually vote. And I think that was just really, really important to that individual student athlete, but then suddenly it became important to all of our student athletes.
Absolutely. Sorry, Nikki, go for it.
Just a couple of like practical things that I think have made an impact for our department. One is we recognized, well, we helped student athletes design a social justice t-shirt, and, you know, made that a part of their kit for the year. And asked each team, they had to, in order to pick them up to distribute them to their team, the team had to have a conversation about how they wanted to activate those, whether as a practice jersey or as a pregame warm up or whatever. Another thing was we recognized in the fall that our student athletes would likely want to use the anthem as an opportunity for peaceful protest. Some might want to. So we got brought together a committee in the fall to talk about, okay, how should we manage this? How should we go about sort of facilitating student athlete opportunity to express themselves in accordance with our own campus statement on academic freedom and freedom of expression. And so developed a strategy, a plan. Each team did it differently. Each team wrote their own public service announcement, PSA, whatever, you know, that's read before the anthem. And then I think the backside is, and so each team looks a little different in what they do, but there's a core piece of it that's consistent. And the backside of it is I've answered probably, I don't know, 40 emails now since Friday. Our team was on the national stage for the first time, right? They've been doing it all year, but on Friday, some of them knelt, and so now it's my job, our president's job, to back them up and to be clear, and also use those as opportunities to educate. And the final thing that I thought was really useful for our department is we started in December a 13 series, small group, division-wide book discussion of me and white supremacy, which is sort of structured in a really good way to be able to have those discussions. And so those small groups consistent would meet every week, do the chapters, have different leaders, and then we had a couple of checkpoints for the whole division. And that really has given our department some common language, like at least a baseline. There's nobody that doesn't know what some of these things, doesn't know what cultural appropriation is now, or doesn't, so I think that's been very helpful to generate further really helpful discussions and helpful holding each other accountable. So it's not just a handful of people that are trying to do it.
Fantastic.
Amazing. Our final question, I want everyone to have the opportunity to answer. We have a lot of students here listening in at home. what would you suggest to someone who's interested in pursuing a career in college athletics, or one day want to sit where you're sitting now, do as a student or early in their career to set them up or prepare, that maybe you wish you had known early on, or that you see as a very useful tool for those in your department have?
Guess I'll go first. I think the thing that I would say is there's a book, Peaceful Warrior, and I always remember that book because it's really a story about how we sometimes get so caught up that we want to be at the end before we've even approached the journey itself. And I think it's so important that I think in listening to Nikki and to Lauren and myself, our stories were not a race. We didn't set out, like we walked across the stage because I got to get to my desk so that I can be an athletic administrator. That wasn't it. The path was, being open enough to try different things, and that along the way you pick up enough skills that give you your own identity as an administrator, as well as perspective. And I think for each of us, I think that's the key. I mean, for me, I've always believed in, we should always try to create, I think as an AD, I always try to create those opportunities within our department where we can. If a student or somebody writes me, I will always follow up that email, or if they want to, I'll invite them to a meeting, a Zoom conversation, for that very reason, to have those conversations. Because I think sometimes people are looking at it as, I got to get from 0 to 60 and I got to do it in a matter of months. Otherwise, I'm going to be a failure, or I got to find something else to do. And, I'm very appreciative of the opportunities that I've had, whether it is to teach, whether it has been to be, working for the president of a college, or serving students of color in different roles. And part of it was because I had a boss who said, you know what, enjoy every stop. And each one of those stops is going to add into something that is going to create a unique you. And so there was nothing that was too far below me. It wasn't about the money. It wasn't about that. It was about the opportunity and my willingness to learn. And so my advice is that if you're interested and you're willing to learn, you're willing to try. Don't go in saying, I have to be this because I think it's going to lead to this. I think, as Lauren said, she went in as an assistant to the athletic director. It's not about the title. It is about the opportunity, and seeking out those opportunities, I think, is critical.
I would add that you can start those now, like in whatever you're doing, wherever you are, whatever stage it is. There are not that many athletics departments. I don't think I've been a part of an athletics department that didn't pretty readily accept help and accept an assistant or a certainly a graduate assistant or just a student worker or whatever. There are almost always opportunities to get involved some way. And then as soon as you get some opportunity, even if it's a ball person, like for soccer, go in and be the frigging best soccer ball person that you could possibly be. Like be kind, be cordial, be enthusiastic, figure out how to do it better, and something else will come next. So it's I think that's probably my best advice, and I would echo Stuart, what you said. It was very well said.
Yeah, I agree. I think, again, my fellow panelists have said it well. I have really two pieces of advice, and one really nicely echoes what Nikki just shared. I tell people to be where their feet are. Wherever your feet are, be fully involved and invested in that place. And that doesn't mean that you're not always in the back of your mind considering, but truly be where your feet are. Try to be the best at whatever it is you're doing, and people will notice that. And you never know what kind of opportunities come from truly trying to be the best where you currently are. And I think the second thing, and I would share this with anyone as well, is tell people your aspirations. I think I would have never told you 10 years ago I would be sitting in this chair. But I think it was that first conversation of, I think I want to be an athletic director, and I think there will be people in your career and your orbit who will see things in you that you probably don't even see in yourself. And those are the people who can really help to guide you and give you the push you need when you question some of your abilities.
Take care of relationships too. I'm sorry to jump in again, but really take care of relationships, nurture them. Write handwritten notes. There's a book called Designing Your Life by a couple of professors from Stanford that has a good chapter, or just part of a chapter. It's like, I don't know, middle of the book, chapter 5, something like that, on doing life design interviews. And it's sort of this notion that you can probably contact anybody to ask if they would talk a little bit about their life and career. Hardly anybody will say no to that. And you never know what you're going to pick up, what relationship you might make, what that conversation leads to, in terms of a connection. So, and in the last part, Lauren said it well with be the best at whatever it is that you're doing right now, and kind of look over, during that time out, look over the edge of whatever that role is and see, how can I make something else better, like in my near orbit. And people are looking for people that want to help and want to make things better and want to be really good people to work with. And so anyway, those are a few other things I'd add.
No, that's amazing. I just want to say thank you to all three of you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to share your insights and your experience and your wisdom with all of us at NYU. I'm going to hand it back to Dr. Kelly for our closing remarks.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Moore. Thank you, Lauren Haney. Thank you, Stuart Robertson, for joining us today. And for everyone out there joining us via the virtual web, thank you for joining us today. And we will talk to you soon in our next series for Insider for the Industry. Take care.
Thank you. Nice to meet you all.
All right.